SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
Welcome back. We are now approaching the business end of day 2 of the Leaders Summit, the G20 Leaders Summit. If all is going according to plan, as it seems to be in terms of keeping track of time, Sherwin, we should be approaching the point where the closing and concluding statement will be delivered at the end of the G20 Leaders Summit.
And if you listen really carefully, there's a drum roll. There's a drum roll. After the Leaders Summit, of course, the Leaders Declaration adopted yesterday, the climax today will be, of course, that closing statement from President Ramaphosa, currently still in closed session, discussing among issues critical minerals, decent work, SDG 8, and of course the artificial intelligence future, and how the critical minerals, as we've been talking, the thread links right back to AI. All those critical minerals, the future of satellite communications, electronic vehicles, batteries, the list goes on.
And I wonder, Shawan, if the president is taking the moment to reflect on the moment, what it means for him personally in terms of how he has navigated on the global stage. But I suspect for answers, right, we could turn to our next guest, Minister Pakstow, Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. Minister, thank you. We won't put you on the spot and ask you how the president is feeling and reflecting on the moment, unless you volunteer that information. But what we want to talk about is we've seen the declaration that has come out in an extraordinary manner, coming at the start of the summit rather than at the end by overwhelming consensus, the president told us. Much of it has to do with entrenching sustainable growth across regions of the world. And a huge chunk of that has to do with a rules-based order, as well as entrenching, and I was saying earlier on that if it can be summed up, the summit, what it has done is write the word multilateralism and put an exclamation point at the end of it. What does that look like in terms of how we navigate the rules-based order around issues such as trade in the wake of the realities that we are dealing with right now?
Thank you very much. Firstly, I think I should say that the vast majority of leaders that spoke yesterday, in particular the main plenary, indicated the reaffirmation of rules-based trading that should take place under the auspices of the World Trade Organization. It imposes a responsibility on us as trade ministers when we meet in March next year at the Ministerial Council of the World Trade Organization to ensure that we're able to take the directives that our leaders have given to us and translate them into an agreement. And I think all of us have committed to ensure that we achieve the reform of the World Trade Organization, that we reaffirm a rules-based system, that we find a mechanism of dealing with issues around dispute resolution that's been a bit of a challenge over the past few years. And I think that the directives have been quite clear from our leaders about the work that we should do.
Minister, talk about the posture of South Africa. We feel as media watching this process unfold that there's been a shift, particularly in how the relationship with the United States is being articulated here. Has it been a frustrating process? South Africa has sought to be as inclusive as possible. I mean, it speaks to the theme of the G20 writ large. But how the United States has behaved has seen South Africa seek to accommodate, bring them into the tent. Your engagements with the United States, you've been there a number of times this year already. Alistair Raiters has been engaging. There is a bilateral relationship that is ongoing and precarious in a way, given the trade negotiations that are continuing. I wonder how the current posture that has been demonstrated and articulated by South Africa at this moment, at this multilateral fora, will infuse or undermine maybe the bilateral negotiations that are ongoing?
Well, firstly, let me reassure you that the bilateral negotiations are still ongoing with the U.S. We're in constant contact, trying to deal with the issues that would impact trade in particular and how the trading rules between us would happen. We continue to engage the U.S. around issues of the renewal of AGOA, so we think that that's important. So that part of the work has not stopped. I do think that it's been a difficult period for the G20 itself, because ultimately you would want all members of the G20 to be present, to be able to express their voice, and to be able to be part of the negotiations. These are not easy negotiations, they are tough negotiations, but you'd want to be in the room and have the discussion. So we think it was quite unfortunate that the US was not here, but we thought that it's important that we continue, and I think the leaders that are here have reaffirmed it, the importance of us continuing to engage, finding agreement, and ensuring that we're able to follow up on that. So at some point the US said that they are coming, and then there was a change. And part of the reality is that we learned of that change through social media. It re-articulated what I think all leaders that are here have experienced themselves. The notion that there's genocide in South Africa, I think, is a far-fetched notion. I would have expected that there would be a different reason. Because restating that, I think, was not reflecting on the reality in South Africa.
Let me stay on the point that Sherwin raises, Minister, and I'm wondering, building on the trip to Washington and the meeting in the White House, where it felt for a couple of months after that perhaps the rhetoric out of Washington was toning down a bit. Were you surprised that it seemed to be a reversal, this non-attendance? Because at some point we were talking about representation at the level of vice president in the United States, and we imagined that that has implications for the work you are doing around the trade and bilateral trade negotiation. How does the seeming reversal at a higher political level in relation to this G20, how does it translate to what you've been seeing in the trade negotiation, the bilateral trade negotiation?
And the vice president's team was already here. I mean, part of the process of preparations included ensuring that they gain access to the venue, that we're able to ensure that their own security requirements and
So
logistics.
what we describe as wasteful and fruitless expenditure.
In the South African context, we'd say that, because the team was already here.
Right.
And I think, I mean, if you think about it, a few months ago, we had a trade ministers G20 session. We had a declaration that came out of that, and the US contributed quite constructively in those discussions. So in many ways, we were looking forward to their continued participation and the contribution to be constructive. And I think that the withdrawal came as a bit of a surprise. What came as a bit more of a surprise is to say we don't need G20 to reach consensus, even if we're not in the room. Because if you're in the room, you can say these are the things that I'm worried about.
You can object.
But if you're outside the room, you can't say don't agree. Just sit and talk amongst each other and say nothing. Now that would have been real fruitless expenditure at the global level. You can imagine the presidents, the ministers, their teams, and everybody that's come here, all the work that's been done over the past year, 130 meetings, virtual meetings that have taken place. Civil society has met, there was B20 in Johannesburg this week. And there's been a lot of work to get to this point. And I think that it would have been irresponsible, I think, of our leaders to sit and say, we're not prepared to reach an agreement. But as you said, we have taken a view that the trade discussions continue. We will continue to engage with our counterparts in the US. We think that it is important that that work continues. We as South Africa are an open economy. We engage with investors from across the board. We see the US as an important trading partner, and we'll continue to pursue those discussions.
South Africa, of course, hands over the presidency of the G20 to the United States. I wonder what that formulation, right, will look like, given the dynamics that exist between South Africa and the United States, but you'll be part of the Troika. The United States will be in the middle. You'll be at the bookend, and the United Kingdom, the incoming president in 2027, will be at the other end. How do you inform the trajectory that has been undertaken at this summit moving forward? Does the United States become a spanner in the works, or do you have to circumnavigate this presidency and wait for the UK? How does implementation work moving forward? Is it up to individual countries? How does this collective move forward with the United States as president?
Well, firstly, implementation does continue because the countries have agreed. The principles of what we want to do have been agreed, and some of them already finding translation into bilateral agreements, into positions that we take into multilateral organizations. I mean, you would know that we started negotiations with the European Union around the Clean Trade and Investment Partnership. They've committed to invest, both as the EU and member countries, in excess of 240 billion rand into the South African economy on the basis of a partnership. It would come in the form of grants, it would come in the form of investments, and of course, access to facilities in the European system in terms of access to capital. So that work continues. The work continues with other countries. We've agreed on investments on critical minerals and to ensure that you don't have a pit-to-pot approach where all the minerals are extracted and sent outside the country. We've had positive engagements with India in this regard, positive engagements with China in this regard. In fact, there's a draft MOU that we're discussing with China in relation to their investments in critical minerals. So in many ways, these principles as agreed to are finding expression in the work that we're doing.
Minister, I want to conclude by asking you a question about South Africa's capacity as a government, whether it be at the national level or at the local level. There's been a lot of discussion around the implementation of planning in terms of the summit. I wonder what the success of hosting this event in Johannesburg under very trying circumstances at times says about the capacity of this government, and what does it say about what this government can do moving forward on the domestic front?
And I think that it is demonstrative of the fact that we've turned the corner. The indicators from an economic point of view are beginning to show that we've turned the corner in terms of rebuilding institutional capability in government, being able to not just articulate direction, but be able to follow up on it. I mean, if you think about it, a few years ago we had problems of rampant load shedding. It was part of our daily life. We've turned the corner. We've partnered with business in relation to logistics. We've done significantly well in terms of improving the logistics environment. We've agreed to accelerate the work that we're doing under the auspices of Operation Vulindlela, which is a partnership between government and business to address particular issues. And I think we're beginning to see the results of that work, and the results of that work is translating into, amongst others, what we see here. I think this is a South African government that has demonstrated that it has rebuilt the capacity that we had lost over time.
Yeah. All right, Minister, thank you for coming through. I think you'll have a lot of South Africans agreeing that we've showcased what we're capable of, and we'll be seriously letting ourselves down if we allowed some of the gains that we've made in the last while to slip away from us.
And I think, in all fairness, I mean, congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you, thanks, much
I mean,
appreciated.
let's conclude like
and
that.
I think
Well
the
done.
congratulations to the President are worth the words
Yeah.
that come with it, because it is his leadership that got us to this point.
I thought you were going to say congrats to the media for the wonderful coverage, but I guess we'll go with that.
And Paul Pakstow is the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, talking to us as we really approach the closing end of the G20 Leaders Summit. We'll take a quick break and our coverage will continue in a moment.
SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.